Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is Monday, July 6th, 2026. So, yeah. Let's scroll down the Steam 24-hour peak concurrent chart and then we'll do a little bit of warm-up and then jump into the news. Binding of Isaac Rebirth is all the way up to 10. Am I in the 24-hour news section? Yeah, I am. Yeah, I don't think there's been any new update to Binding of Isaac Rebirth, but I don't know. Like, inherently, people or bots. I don't think there's any bots really playing Binding of Isaac Rebirth because there's not really any multiplayer. Maybe they finally got their multiplayer going on it. But yeah. The top 10 tend to stay pretty standard over the long period of time. Counter-Strike 2, or CSGO as it used to be called, Dota 2, PUBG. But this also might just really highlight that there is not, right now at least, a big game because there's so much reaction and fear from GTA. It might also be an issue, certainly, with the PlayStation in the physical media announcement. Although I don't know how that would really affect things. That seems like that would be a really complicated theory to have to throw out there. I still maintain that if you can stomach the visuals and the themes of child abuse and anti-Christianity, or Satanism, whatever you want to call it, Binding of Isaac Rebirth is by far the best game ever made. Like, by far. If you can stomach all the caveats there. Which, it's still shocking that there isn't a Zelda game like Binding of Isaac Rebirth, considering how influenced the Zelda game Binding of Isaac is by Zelda, the original Zelda, and the dungeons in the original Zelda. Nintendo really dropped the ball there. So yeah, what have I been doing over the weekend? Well, what often happens is when there's an emergency thing that pops up, I am just not in the mood mentally to start that new project, and that certainly seems to be the case with replacing my router. If I was smart and just was doing things the right way, I would be replacing my router as fast as possible because my old router may completely die and I may lose all those settings forever. And yet, that's not what I did over the weekend. What I did over the weekend was a lot more follow-up cleanup, although there's still a ton to do, and a lot of playing Metroid Prime. Which, yeah, there's some problems with Metroid Prime, particularly going back and playing it in modern times, in that it just doesn't have auto-saving where it should. Like, pretty obviously, they should be checkpointing right before a boss fight, and there should be full health right before boss fights. Otherwise, you're going to run into situations where you just die, and then you're back 4 or 5 rooms, and maybe lost as to where you're going. That is the other problem, is that it is very easy to get lost and just not know where to go, or just walk past things. The space boots in particular, like, I kind of got the general guise of where they were directing me, and yet I missed a jump before I had the space boots and never realized I needed to go back up there. Thought I had gone back up there to the room to get the space boots, and the game does not actually give you a hint there. Like, the game will give you hints at very specific points where you reach near where you're supposed to go, but it's not just like using a hint system where it's a countdown timer and it will just point you in the right direction if you play for an extra hour and just don't know where you're going. I can guarantee that because that's exactly what I did. So yeah, the hint system is more of a facade than a real hint system. There is no auto saving spot. That does make emulation work a little bit better in that you can make auto saves and you can make save states in places outside of save rooms. But then there is also a problem playing it on a Steam Deck, in that Metroid Prime in particular wants you to hold the charge and then press the Y button at the same time when fully charged up on your blaster to do a super missile. And there's just like nothing I've remapped that would do that. And because, unlike the GameCube, where the A button was very big and you could hold your thumb on the A button and hit the X or Y button at the same time, you just really can't easily do that. So very often you'll hold a charge, or I'll hold a charge at least, and then hit the X button and turn it into the morph ball. Metroid Prime is very travel centric and morph ball centric, which is fine, but it does also kind of highlight that most of the rooms in the game, outside of the boss rooms, almost all of them, are rooms designed for you to not really die in. Because if you did find a way to die in a lot of those rooms, you would be going back maybe more than 5 rooms to the last save spot. And certainly most of the rooms are designed to barely be playable and fun if you don't have a fairly powerful gun and space boots, particularly space boots. Like the jumps, you can barely make them, and I am finding myself, maybe because the screen is stretched a little bit, that might be part of it, but I'm finding myself having to run off the edge, Looney Tunes style, before jumping just to get the ledge of the next jump. And these are jumps you're supposed to make. Once you have the space boots and you can double jump, that goes away for the most part, although you could easily over jump in a lot of cases too. Let's look at the most wishlisted games lately. But yeah, there is room for polish if you were going to make a Metroid Prime in modern times. But it's still a great game. There's a lot of scanning. It definitely feels like there should have been some stuff that automatically scanned. There is tiny bits of voiceover. At the very beginning you have a whole voiceover intro, but every now and then you also get a little voiceover there. In a modern time, you'd think maybe all the scanning might be either an AI, text-to-speech. I hate the idea of using AI in general and calling text-to-speech AI. Text-to-speech has existed a lot earlier than generative AI has, and it's a very different thing. I don't think people would really complain too much with text-to-speech instead of having to read a lot of the logs that you scan in Metroid Prime. Although, for a company like Nintendo, they definitely could just hire a voice actress to read out all the lines of dialogue, and just give a voice to either the computer inside of Samus Aran's helmet and suit, or Samus Aran herself reading it out loud. Yeah. there is definitely a lingering feeling that Samus Aran seems to constantly chase after Ripley and uh, Metroids in general, trying to kill them, and so she probably should be, as a character, voiced more and shown as having either PTSD or straight up species racism against Metroids, or have a really good military standing orders as to why she keeps chasing after these guys, often without the Federation's permission slash assignment. You do get into a 3D map of the solar system, and it does very much say that Talos 4, the world you are in the Metroid Prime series, is in the same solar system as planet Zebus, where the Metroids are from, and there are several other planets that are in that solar system too, which I would have thought they would have thought a little bit bigger than that and had the Metroids be on a different solar system than Talon 4. As far as we know, there were no Metroids on Talos 4 until the Space Pirates brought them there. But what was on Talos 4 was all of your equipment. And it is just depicted as these holographic icon things, which were left by the ancient race of the Chozo for some warrior in the future. But this is not the first time you would have had those bits of equipment either. Definitely not in the order in which you would have played the game, but also not kind of in reality. I don't know. I guess maybe the Prime series is supposed to be between Metroid 1 and maybe Metroid 2, but definitely between Super Metroid, so maybe there wasn't things like Speed Boost Ball in Metroid 1. But yeah, there definitely isn't any reactions, like she doesn't know what this technology is, and it's not like she's just integrating it or creating it herself. So, yeah. And I think you pretty much had most of those abilities before you landed on Talos 4, but maybe not. You had enough abilities, certainly. And there definitely is stuff like the Phazon stuff that is new later on in the game, but yeah. Early on, and this is a criticism you can make with any Metroid game, is that you spend a lot of time just re-unlocking abilities that you already had. And yeah, if they are ever going to make a new Metroid game, they probably should just do a joke where it looks like she's about to fall, or it looks like she's about to collide with a wall, which is what happens in Metroid Prime, and it's going to break all of her abilities and take all of your stuff offline, which that's all it says, is that really it's just offline. So it could have made a lot of sense to just say you got enough energy to turn something back online. You could even see a Metroidvania game being made where you pick an ability, and picking an ability then, like a Mega Man game, lets you reach different locations and more of a choose your own adventure, go in any direction type gameplay experience. It definitely would have made a lot more sense if you were just collecting energy. Speaking of energy, it seems like there probably are slightly fewer energy tanks in Metroid Prime than some of the other Metroid games, which is fine. Um, and definitely Metroid Prime is way better about having patterns that you need to do instead of just pouring a massive amount of missiles and shots at enemies. Although it's once you get to super missile, you kind of really want to use the super missile because it's going to take a lot longer to defeat bosses without it. And they have the whole visor thing in Metroid Prime, which most of the game I'm spending in the scan mode scanning, and it probably isn't as long of a game as I think, because I probably have just mixed Metroid Prime 2 and 1 in my head into one longer experience. Effectively, that is what the whole trilogy, or quadrilogy now, probably is. It's just one really long game. But yeah, the scan visor is what you mostly are in, but you can't shoot in the scan visor, so anytime you're actually having to fight things, you switch out of that. And then in one brief section, I think, really, the thermal visor is really needed, but it is a pretty terrible experience, because when you do need the thermal visor, it usually means it's completely black outside, completely dark, so you can't see anything with any of the other visors. So I think they kind of go away from using it that much. The labeling of things when you do scan them being made of certain materials kind of sucks, because it's not saying that you can destroy this with a missile or you can destroy this with a super missile. It's just saying that it's cracked and it's made of this certain material, and if you don't go into the menu and look at your equipment and read the description of the equipment, you would have no clue which materials can be destroyed with what. And frankly, it's just easier to trial everything, like a power beam, charge shot, missile, super missile, and at some point super bomb will also just come into play. But yeah, that's a lot of complaints for a game that's otherwise pretty perfect. It's pretty great, and that has been a big time waster over the weekend. I've also been watching Stargate Atlantis, and yeah, there's a weird promotional material where you see the crew of the team and they're all in this black leather, and yeah, at least for the first 3 seasons, they're never in black leather. They're in a grayish kind of like less military garb, and then when they're out and about, they're still in kind of a military grays more than a black SWAT team military type outfit. This would have been still in the era in which the militarization of police in general had not turned into everybody wearing black, which I think in the real world that's a huge mistake. And I mean, if I was president, I'd say, you know what, we're gonna put these boys in blue back in blue, and we're gonna get away from the black, because that is just an intimidating color that evokes the SS era outfits of the Nazi party, at least in the mind of some. And certainly it doesn't scream, we're here to help. When you look at paramedics, doctors, firemen, none of them are shifting to wearing all black. And frankly, wearing black is going to make you hotter. So if it's a sweating thing, black makes no sense too. Unfortunately, there really isn't too much good to say about Stargate Atlantis. It's just more Stargate for people who couldn't get enough of Stargate from the 15 plus seasons. I think this SG1 went on, and also it came out while SG1 was wrapping up for its final time, so there is definitely an overlap that happened there, but it just kind of doesn't work because there isn't really a great amount of character development for any of the characters, and the enemies suck. They introduced a Wraith, episode 1 of Stargate Atlantis, and then they are pretty much your only main enemy throughout the first 3 seasons is how far I've gone so far, and there's just this ever increasing push to keep the budgets low, so you see the Wraith very rarely. Every planet they go to is just kind of the same set of here's a medieval / Renaissance era people, or here's a tribe of people that maybe live in huts before then, but they kind of even moved away from that. They're all normal humans that speak English. That never gets explained as far as I can tell. They all have like guns that clearly would have been made on Earth, and there's just no explanation as to why the guns in this entirely different galaxy looks exactly the same as Earth guns, or why a cup that they drink water out of looks like it is just an off-the-shelf product from Earth. They don't try to make any of the props look good. There is also this weird push for more hand-to-hand combat, often done in just like these training sessions for no reason. Clearly they wanted more physical activity because they weren't getting that out of the very old actors of Stargate SG-1 at that point, but it just doesn't make sense. Like, there's really never a point where it's obvious that the Wraith in particular are easily defeated or better defeated in hand-to-hand combat versus shooting them with guns. And so usually when they're fighting the Wraith, they are shooting the Wraith with guns, so the hand-to-hand combat comes down to almost never making any sense that they would even practice it. Yeah, and the first alien character, Taylor, is kind of a pointless character in that she's supposed to be the outsider, but she kind of stops being the outsider, and she's supposed to have all these leadership abilities, but she doesn't actually do anything with the leadership abilities most of the time. Plus they make the main protagonist, Shepard, far too good. They have him be a genius, which undercuts the genius character, scientist character. They have him be a nice guy, which makes the right decisions most of the time, which undercuts the leadership of Taylor in her role. And they have him be a decent soldier, which undercuts Ronin eventually, Jason Momoa being on the show, and pretty much undercuts the other military guy before Ronin showed up, which they did nothing with that character either. The thing about being in a completely different galaxy and being on Atlantis and having all this new technology gets underused quite a bit to tell different kinds of story. Which, in fairness, I think Star Trek Voyager pretty much had the exact same problems. Is that you have a Star Trek ship and they're in a completely different galaxy, but by the end of the series it's all about fighting the Borg once again. And honestly, I think Deep Space Nine probably did a better job of telling different kinds of stories than Voyager did. Yeah. And people don't even remember the names of the other alien species that were the enemies in Voyager. I don't. before the Borg just became the main focus again. Still, every now and then struggling to maintain Pokemon TCG Pocket, struggling to find the time to do Memento Mori. Even with those two games, I still am barely dipping a toe into the world of mobile gaming, and even in dipping that toe in the world of mobile gaming, I can pretty much ascertain that it's not for me, and that mobile gaming in general I don't think is for what you would really consider a high consuming audience of video games in other form factors. I think it's very fair to say that, particularly with gacha games, you take your one main game and maybe a secondary game, and those are the two games you play, and you don't play anything else. Certainly, if I was working a 9 to 5, 40-hour plus job, I'd have a hard time imagining that I could play games and also do the daily mobile things. It depends heavily, I guess, on how much video gaming you can do while getting paid during the job, or during 15-minute breaks or 30-minute lunches, things like that. And yeah, making small incremental progress in both games, as you always are. Kind of leave it at that. Yep. Inherently, I probably will watch Stargate Universe after Stargate Atlantis. And there's definitely episodes where I'm falling asleep and not even going back and start and watching the episodes that I missed. Because, yeah, there's just kind of nothing that's going on with Stargate Atlantis. Which, yeah, inherently I imagine it is a writing issue, in that everything's already been written and they just weren't paying anywhere enough for a writing room like Star Trek The Next Generation was to, otherwise it really should have been a lot of Star Trek 1 and Star Trek Next Generation episodes should have just been whole cloth ripped off for Stargate SG-1 and Stargate Atlantis. Yeah. And they had some opportunity to do that, certainly. They run into the replicators. It wouldn't have been crazy to have a replicator be your Commander Data type character. There are nowhere as good written horror episodes that are actually made as horror episodes like there are in SG-1. But then there are also just no cases where you run into different kinds of creatures and societies, and that there is real thought. It's just always, in the case of Stargate Atlantis, that your team is the good guys. Even if they accidentally do something bad, they're still the good guys, instead of them actually wondering if they're the good guys. You definitely don't have a Ferengi-like character that just want money. You definitely don't have a warlike creatures like the Klingons that also have honor. Maybe the Wraith are somewhat like the Klingons. But yeah. There's weirdly no holodeck in Atlantis. I mean, it would have been very easy to rip off a lot of those episodes. There's no romances that happen in there, and I imagine a lot of this is sci-fi didn't want to okay any scripts that did anything different, and so you run into this very often repeated pattern of they get on a planet, they get into a conflict, They go through the conflict and they escape. And that pattern gets repeated so often, it's just not interesting after even a couple of episodes. Whereas there are entire episodes of Next Generation where the conflict is mental, or the conflict is just talking to people, and that's just not how it works in Stargate. Like that whole episode where Wesley Crusher walks on the grass and they're going to euthanize him because the penalty for breaking any laws on that planet is death, and they have this whole court scene to argue to prevent Wesley Crusher from dying. You could easily have just whole cloth ripped that off in Stargate Atlantis. And yeah, there probably should be more variety in the filler episodes and less of just trying to build up the Wraith to being a bigger enemy than they really feel like they are. In contrast, I think the Borg being introduced as an enemy are shown on the very first episode of Next Generation by Q. There definitely isn't a Q-like character, although there easily could have been. But yeah, the Borg are shown in the first episode, and then I don't think you actually see the Borg again until the end of like season 2, maybe season 1. And it is just like the last 2 episodes of season 1 or season 2 and the first episode of the next season, and that is it for the major bad guy in Next Generation. I guess if you were a fan group and you were really gonna just try to make more Stargate stuff, ripping off other sci-fi channels or sci-fi shows like Next Generation would be a great way to do it. It'd be very easy to translate a lot of the episodes into something that would work. And honestly, I do think it gets just like way worse when you get down to the number of Stargate universe. I think that concept is even worse. I have also been doing flawless cleanup. You can see I took it from already. It's been just a massive culling of followed games. So I'm down to 3,365 games on the follow list. The problem with any of this is I let the macro run and then I start playing Metroid Prime. So I'm spending 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes playing that. Then I come back and I can only really sit in a chair for a few minutes before I start to get uncomfortable, or at least my brain starts to wander. So yeah, I'm not able to just have that button seat economics that I once used to have in my youth, to sit and process through the follow list. The good news is once I process through the follow list once, it's probably going to be between 1,000 and 2,000 games that will stay on the follow list, because I'm just doing a massive culling of anything AI, which either there has been a massive number of games that I have not recognized had the AI in some aspect in them, which is probably the case, or all games have been forced to disclose AI and go back and update their pages. And with the new modifications I made to Steam pages, it is now very obvious which games have AI, very obvious which games have online co-op. And if I see any AI, at the moment at least, the game is almost certainly going to be eliminated. I might convince myself to keep something if it looks really, really interesting, but the fact of the matter is the vast majority of the games that I have put on the fault list in the past 6 months to a year have been games that are maybe interesting, not games that are amazingly interesting. And a significant amount of those games also haven't even come out yet. So yeah, there's going to be a massive culling, and going forward there's going to be a massive reluctance to actually add anything with AI to the follow list. So this problem, through me spending a lot of extra time, is finally going to fix itself. At least that is my hope. It's going to finally fix itself, and I will stop creating these back logs of games that are game lists. But I'm spending way too much time sorting through a list of games I potentially buy and not enough time actually playing video games, which noticeably, while I have been doing this follow list cleanup, I also have not been getting back to playing Martian Memorandum. Text more free Martian Memorandum. It does kind of feel like, with maybe the exception of Mecha Chameleon, there hasn't been anything too new lately. And I do think we are probably going to hit that point until Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced comes into play. And that'll probably be our next big game. It is certainly worth pointing out too that Amazon Prime just recently canceled a project to make a new Stargate show, and I'm unfortunately rewarding them by watching Atlantis. And yeah, there does seem like there's a similar type scenario in that there is a percentage of people who are rewarding PlayStation with their announcement of getting rid of physical media by buying up PlayStation games and hoarding them effectively now. But yeah, that is the craziness of the consumer society that we have been brainwashed to live in and think in, and that we just desperately want things even when buying them is going to go against our own boycotts that we should be implementing. Eugenics still going on fine, and 24-hour peak of 7,000 is a huge number, particularly for a single player game. But weirdly, it's definitely not getting anywhere close to the top 100 games being played. This one is a very positively reviewed game for what it is. There's also a Reddit post of somebody who had made a Rage game, and the game is like on sale for $3 and starts for $5, and then people are playing it for less than 2 hours and then asking for a refund, even reviewing it, saying it's a great game, and then refunding it, which that in itself may just be a joke or a meme more than something that's really happening that much. And this game developer is definitely using that as an excuse to push for eliminating the 2 hours, no questions asked refund policy, which in fairness, there is one question that is asked in the no questions asked refund policy, which is how many times have they done this? Because you do get warning emails if you do it too often, and they will stop giving you immediate refunds if you do it too often. So the system never really was designed for you to play games 100% for free. I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a pretty easy to guess calculation where if you're not putting 80% of new dollars in and then you're just refunding and taking those refunds and buying new games with the refunds, that they'll see you as a less desirable customer at that point. But yeah, the point mostly there is if you make a rage game, a lot of people are going to ask for refunds, and they may even feel bad about asking for refunds, and they might positively review your game. So you shouldn't be saying, well, they reviewed the game positive, but then they refunded, so that positive review doesn't really count in my mind. But yeah, if you make a rage game, a lot of people are going to refund it. If you make a short game, a lot of people are going to refund it. The system has been in place for a while now. Even for games that were made before that system, it would have been easy enough to think about adding content to make your game longer, or just not complaining that people are refunding your super short game. There's a huge problem of super short games. There's a way bigger problem of AI games. Now it has become very obvious to me that that's the case. And there's been a pretty large problem of rage games, which for the most part, I would say most rage games are trying to be streamer bait games that people will stream and play and not really want to play themselves. Like a regular gamer probably won't want to play a rage game, although you do have exceptions like Super Meat Boy that pretty obviously is something a lot of people wanted to play. But yeah, the AI apocalypse of video games has apparently been on us for a year at least. Yep. So yeah, the GameCube button on Metroid Prime, to talk about it, since we got a picture here, wants you to hold the A button, and then while holding the A button, hit the Y button. So you have to stick your whole thumb on this and then hit this. I need to go into the Dolphin emulator and remap like a back button or the left bump, which isn't actually doing anything. The right bump is the Z button to a GameCube controller. But yeah, it would be very easy if you remapped X and Y also. But yeah, if you accidentally hit B, you will jump. If you accidentally hit X, you'll turn into a spin ball, so you have to do it like in this tiny little slot vertically, and that's really hard to pull off in the middle of a boss fight. I don't know if you actually would jump if you hit B, but nothing good will happen, I'm sure. Whereas on the GameCube, the A button was like 4 times bigger than the Y button was, and it would have been very easy to hit the Y button because it would have been in the Nintendo style, in that A would still have been in the center, B would have been over here, but Y would have been over here, and X would probably have been over there. And I probably should just look up a picture of a GameCube controller just to show the difference. Yeah. So yeah, the Y button is way over here, and it's really a curved thing. X is way over there. B is over there. I'd forgotten that. So yeah, what would have been very easy to do on a GameCube controller is very hard to do otherwise. I would also point out that the higher precision of a Steam Deck playing Metroid Prime is going to probably mean a little bit more wobbliness than what you really would have gotten with a GameCube controller. This was the point the GameCube controller was what the point where Nintendo realized that they needed a second analog stick, and they still didn't really want to do a second analog stick, so they made the C stick as far as a camera. And weirdly, it is kind of that Xbox layout compared to PlayStation's dual analogs at the bottom. Yeah. I definitely heard someone complaining about how even when you get premium controllers these days, they don't add new buttons that do anything. That's interesting how the page just updated like that. But maybe the sale there does indicate why so many people are playing Binding of Isaac Rebirth, is that it's on sale once again. But yeah, there is. I lost my train of thought there. I don't think I'm gonna get it back either. Oh, on a side note, I really hate how helpless it really is during the summer months, as far as just your electricity bill skyrocketing. There's basically no controlling it as far as I can tell. There's just going to be really expensive bills during the summer. And the only thing I guess you can do, and I don't know why this crashed, this tab specifically crashed. My macro didn't run correctly. I don't know exactly why it didn't run correctly. This is just one of my interstitial things that crashed. So of all the things that shouldn't crash, it would be one of these interstitial ones. Like, I turned on another one of the extensions that I had on, and it still seems like it is running out of it's just running out of order for some reason. I did work on the programming to replace how the news articles get opened, and I've only made a small amount of progress there. Inherently, there is a lot of learning and foundational work that I'm still doing as far as making Violent Monkey scripts. I was trying to use a JavaScript broadcast channel to communicate between tabs. So one tab would be told to open, and then when that tab would be finished opening, it would send a signal to open the next tab. You can't do that because you're hosting the code yourself locally, and it's getting blocked for security reasons, apparently. That's my guess, at least it was what was going on. But then I found that there's actually internal settings that will do just about the same inside of Violent Monkey, and that certainly has opened up the door to the thought of the thought of having internal settings that can be modified to run things instead of using local storage cookies, which for the most part would be harder to modify and change. And so almost all my code has now a reason to potentially be changed, and as I go forward working on that, it will be a case that my scripts will be more user-friendly in that I can say don't change any of the code section, but go to the value section and change the values, and that will work hopefully a little bit better. But yeah, there is even a ability to add a button that you can click to trigger actions through Violent Monkey, which that too might prove to be useful. That being said, yeah, as I'm still doing the follow list cleanup, sitting in the chair, either doing follow list cleanup or doing programming, I have to pick one or two. And so I moved fairly slowly working on that, and I am still having problems with identifying that the absolute last page I opened has finished loading up and running the next page to open very quickly. There is something in Firefox that if it just tries to open a ton of tabs, eventually it will open a new tab in a new window. It just glitches that way. That is a Firefox thing I've seen with other extensions like UI Vision, where it randomly will open a new tab in a new window. But yeah, there is still race conditions and triggering problems, and that it is running too fast. And the whole point of doing all of this is to make it move slow like a human so it doesn't get blocked by servers and look like a DOS attack. Alright, well, before we get into the news, I'm going to take a break, so I'll be back in just a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Looks like we've got a little bit of breaking news. This could be totally made up and wrong, but it does seem like Double Fine has successfully negotiated to be independent again. Um, so the first of what seems like will be several of Microsoft's acquisitions have now started to be shed. Uh, Probably details are going to enlighten that situation a lot more. Honestly, for the case of Double Fine, it would be very weird if Microsoft wanted to maintain the IPs of anything Double Fine has ever made. Psychonauts would be the main thing that Microsoft might want to maintain, and I seriously question anybody else would be able to make a Psychonauts game other than the people still working at Double Fine at the moment. Brutal Legend as a concept might have been cool, but they really weren't able to do anything with Brutal Legend just because of the massive amount of licensed music in it, and like Costume Quest hasn't done anything new in a long time, and they're basically not worth mentioning any of the other Double Fine games. I seriously doubt this is going to lead to Double Fine making games faster, or making more games, or making different kinds of games, or better games, or anything like that. I seriously suspect that this is just going to be Double Fine will be in maintenance mode. Maybe they'll try and do a Kickstarter like they did before for some new point and click thing, or a Kickstarter for Psychonauts 3, or a Kickstarter for a completely new game. That would make a lot of sense. But yeah, they rushed out that game Kiln, Microsoft I assume did, to make the last bit of profit that they imagine that they will make for a long time, for would have made for a long time from Double Fine. And by being independent now, Double Fine could potentially have a much better churn out of games because they'll just be forced to do that. We might even see the main guy in charge of Double Fine step down, and under new leadership, maybe Double Fine would go in a different direction. I wouldn't be surprised if there is a decent number of people who really do want to make something different, or make anything at all at Double Fine, and it's just not happening because of poor leadership. That almost certainly was the case when Microsoft had them. But yeah, I think I've been pretty consistent in assuming that Double Fine would be one, if not the first, of the games to be shed by Microsoft. I think we'll see a lot of other teams that don't immediately come to mind also get shed by Microsoft, but it will be less likely that Microsoft would want to get rid of the Halo developers, or Activision, or Blizzard, or the makers of the Elder Scrolls games and the Fallout games. I think those companies in particular are definitely pretty safe, relatively safe. Of course, all of Xbox may be excised from Microsoft, and if that is the case, then who knows what will happen at that point. Anyways, let's go through the news. It is just going to be random in different orders. So we have Video Games Chronicle saying Suda51 names the Resident Evil creator Shinji Mikami as a mentor in his new interview. That probably doesn't mean too much, because in Japanese, that probably just means senpai, and it could very well be an honorific that you would give industry-wide to him. I'd almost have to see a Japanese version of what is said. And it seems more like he's saying he wished he was a mentor than he really was a mentor. Is this really a headline that means anything? No, not really. It doesn't. It really doesn't mean anything at all. I see his first name, if this is really a actual first name, is Goichi, and I know Ichi is one, each. So I wonder if Go is 50. Probably is. Or at least it sounds like how 51 would be said, and maybe spelled differently in Japanese. That's often the case. But yeah, this really isn't newsworthy, is it? Like, an interview happened. Alright. So, immediately, because things are out of order, it's time for me to bring about my keyboard. So, I still have an issue where the close hotkey causes a problem. Like, I've just hit the C button, and this should have closed the tab, and yet it doesn't. And let's see. Steam add hotkeys is not enabled. Why is that the case? No, it was enabled. I'm just misinterpreting it. See, it still tries to click something for some reason, and it's not closing. So yeah, I'm still having some debugging issues as to why that's the case. Now, a lot of debugging issues are gonna pop up. A lot of polishing, transitioning to these Violent Monkey scripts, which is the open source version of Grease Monkey, is the way forward. Certainly. I have like uBlock Origin, and just on this one Gamatsu article, there's like 238 add elements that are being blocked by uBlock Origin Extra. A roguelike wave defense game, Company of Heroes 3, adds Final Stand announced for PC. Maybe I should have the close button not just be for Steam pages. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, for the most part, I'm trying to get rid of anything early access on the follow list, but this is only about a month away, and so I'll leave it. I definitely am eliminating some things that I may never see again, and I don't think it's really that big of a loss. Inherently, I've been digging for these hidden gems on Steam for over a couple of years now, and the reality is very few hidden gems have been found. It is way more the case that there's just a lot of garbage games, or games that just are irrelevant, and they may be like D tier games, but nobody will play them, and there's just no reason to really highlight them. Maybe if my channel was way more successful, I might go and play some of these games that have less than 30 reviews and give them a try, but I'm still having to lean heavily on popularity. to try and get more views. The Heroes of Might and Magic 2 project, F-Heroes 2 version 1.1.17 is out now. This is Gaming on Linux article. It is interesting how we're getting fairly consistent updates for these open source projects to run the old Heroes of Might and Magic games, as we are right on the verge of a new Heroes of Might and Magic game coming out. And yeah, I really doubt I'd want to go back and play Heroes of Might and Magic 2 or 3 or even 1, just because all those games are so long. They have so many scenarios in them that if I'm going to play anything, I would play the new game and have that be the only game I play. Some of these are articles that we've probably already talked about. EVE Online's cross-platform game engine framework is now fully open sourced. This is actually GameDeveloper.com talking about that. And then Sony tells developers they'll still be able to make discs, but only for older games. So it is pretty much a point that they're saying we're not going to let you make discs for new games because our next PlayStation is not going to have a disc drive, so that doesn't make any sense. Plus, we want to just kill the disc manufacturing concept completely. I do think the idea of putting like an NFC tag reader in a new console and then selling fairly nice figurines, even if you had like a cheap version where it is just a cardboard cutout standee that you could put on the shelf, maybe not even with a plastic base to hold it up, right? Maybe just a origami cardboard triangle. And by cardboard cutout, I mean something that is probably 6 or 7 inches tall at most, not a huge, takes up a full bit of a room cardboard cutout with an NFC tag in it that would be your game license. Might be a cool idea. Or a 3D actual figurine for a limited edition, collector's edition would be a nicer version of that. The thing about that idea though is, last time I checked, the size and price of NFC tags were pretty low, and with that you may not be able to store anything more than a simplistic code. So let's see if we can do a Google search. Yeah, so like the Intags 213s, according to this AI search, offers 144 bytes of information. So that's not anywhere close to even a kilobyte of information. 1 byte would be 1 character. So potentially you could write a 144-bit long character that would be an activation key, like a Steam activation key, which Steam activation keys are probably about 25 characters if you take the dashes out. And it's 24 cents to 43 cents per sticker. Not that expensive, but kind of expensive for what you would think a sticker should cost. The last time I looked at NFC cards for security, and this is why a lot of the cards that are Access Badge ID cards use their own proprietary technology, is because they don't have that much information on them. is that ideally I would want 10 kilobytes, 10,000 bytes of a really long encryption key on the card, and possibly some processing on the card to create a public key that you would give to the access card reader to then verify with a private key that would be on a server. But yeah, that is a pretty excessive amount, and you can see here, according to this, the best you can get is 888 bytes, so less than a kilobyte. Let's see. Let's ask how big should an encryption key be in storage? Yeah. So AES, in contrast, wants 256 bits. 256 bits, you divide by 8, 816, 24 is 32 bytes. That is not particularly long. Boy, is my typing bad. Typing basically in the dark. If we ask how big an elliptical curve one should be, it's 256 bits. But that's only because elliptical curves actually are assumed to be more secure. But I would still say you want 10K if you could get 10K. DSA security here is 2K basically. So yeah, if you bought the highest 888-bit one, or even the medium NFC tags, you could put a elliptical curve key, public key on them. So the technology is there. It's not to the level I would like it to be, but it's there, where you could put an encryption key on an NFC tag. It would have to be in a unique encryption key, though, and so you'd have to have on the factory line a writer that would be writing that, and that's usually not how the security works. The Amiibos, for instance, have the exact same signal for all of them. There's no difference between one Amiibo and the other, and then another of the exact same model. And a lot of security is based on just a hard-coded serial number that can't be cloned, or is harder to clone at least, which is not going to be particularly long either. That would be on the NFC tag before you even wrote to it. But yeah, you could very easily also have it be that you only get 2 or 3 activations on a certain elliptical key code before everybody is signed out and they have to sign back in. And then it would just be too frustrating to have people share their cardboard cutouts or figurines. Alright. That's enough rambling for today. I've still got a ton of stuff to do in my life. I always do, and would like to do some more follow list cleanup. I still have a ton of that that needs to be done. I'll probably be working on that for the rest of this week. There is actually no reason why I shouldn't work on the routers during the week too. I was being silly by saying that I could certainly move the data over during the week and then move the routers over during the weekend if I think something might go wrong. Let's see, Komatsu has Persona 4 Revival Protagonist trailer, Meet the Hero. If you want to look at that trailer. Onimusha Way of the Sword releases earlier on September 4th. Steam Deck and SteamOS will be playable. Okay. See, this is what happens when you press spacebar, and I don't know if that actually, like, we have family sharing here. Right below family sharing is for full controller support. Yeah. Family sharing full controller support. So it is scrolling down exactly one page. I wouldn't say it's particularly smooth, and it definitely isn't working with Steam's read more to expand things. I guess I could program it to always click on the read mores on pages, but I'm not sure it would even be necessary because I kind of rarely do that anyways. Let's see, Ingress developer Niantic Spatial is shuttering its New Zealand office. The move comes with the company pivoting away from video games and entertainment. Yeah, Pokemon Go maker sold its video game business to a Saudi-owned mobile publishing group, Scopely. Interesting. So I suppose that was something that was obviously going to happen. Cicadia. Does this look good enough to make a follow list on it or a short YouTube short on it? I'm not really sure. I think I'll do YouTube short. There. Yep. It definitely feels like with the elimination of AI, I probably am going to start getting a lot more desperate to make YouTube shorts. Or YouTube shorts are just going to happen fewer and far between, which would normally be okay, but actually it's a problem with YouTube shorts because the way, at least in the past, to succeed with YouTube shorts was to flood them with 3 to 5 shorts per day. Some of these we've already talked about, like Hideo Kojima being really sad about PlayStation killing discs and frightened for the future of ownership. This is one of those cases where Hideo Kojima is becoming one of these people that they are just quote mining more than he is actually making games. We've seen this happen in other industries too. You have like Steven Spielberg probably getting quoted a lot in interviews, way more than actually making movies, particularly in his later years. Hideo Kojima not making a ton of games these days. That's going to be nothing of interest. Gigabash DLC Ultraman Zero has been announced. I would not know specific details around any specific Ultraman, so leave it at that. Some great native Linux games are to grab during the Steam summer sale. This is basically just pushing advertisements until then. And see, this is another case where the tab for until then was on the left, and there's really no good reason why that should be the case. And yet it somehow is happening with the UI visions as yet another thing I'm hoping will just disappear when I stop using UI vision. It's just wonkiness around the UI visions macro. In reality, there is a lot of extra code and weirdness in how the code is implemented in my UI vision macros compared to how the code will be implemented by just being directly injected and not having a wrapper layer of a user-friendly interface using the Violent Monkey scripts. Things should just be snappier. Things should just work more often. Things shouldn't break. I shouldn't have to implement a whole bunch of pauses and breaks to make things run smoothly. I shouldn't have to run verifications to make sure things ran smoothly. There is a lot of extra in UI vision scripts that should just go away. So the code itself should get smaller and more manageable and just easier to understand. Of course, the hope is to get it to work, and then it will work for a very long time. That is the hope with all my projects, so I can just be done with them and move on to the next project. So here we have GameDeveloper.com. It does seem like we do have an article here. Xbox is cutting 3,200 jobs and parting ways with Double Fine, Compulsion Games, Ninja Theory, and Undead Labs. And then the quote here is, it's neither possible nor desirable to own every great independent studio. So the companies are South of Midnight developer Compulsion Games, which they definitely weren't given a fair chance. Psychonauts, which maker Double Fine, which I think was given more than a fair chance. Now, noticeably here, Compulsion Games may not be keeping South of Midnight, which may not hurt them that much, where Double Fine is returning to independence and ownership of their respective IP catalogs, which probably was in the agreement when they were acquired. And then Ninja Theory and Undead Labs have agreed to join new ownership with financing required to bring Senua and State of Decay 3 to market. So I'm not sure who the new owner of Ninja Theory and Undead Labs is. It would be interesting if it was PlayStation. It would be interesting if it was Embracer. It very possibly is just EA or 2K or something like that. It'd be very interesting if it was like Apple. Arcane Lion is perhaps still on the chopping block. Real question here, is this the end of the cutting or is this just the beginning? And I suspect even if there is a decent break before we get any new news of layoffs and cuts, that this is not the end of the bleeding and the cutting, and that there will be more jobs and more layoffs and more companies to go, and it may very well come down to maybe not entire companies are cut, because these are relatively the easy decisions, just to completely get rid of the company or former companies. and we may just start to see entire offices being cut. It is also possible that none of these companies were unionized, but maybe they were. Like, I kind of think Double Fine might have been unionized. I suspect none of the others were. So they might very well be getting rid of the non-union companies first, which does tend to happen before they go after the union companies for layoffs. And that's one of the few things that unions can kind of protect you from, sort of, is that you'll be the second on the layoff list instead of the first on the layoff list. Even though, yeah, they would love to lay off union companies, it gets a lot more difficult when you have an organization with lawyers who can fight back. WayForward has announced the next Shantae game at Anime Expo with a 2027 release window. Shantae, a fairly beloved platformer game with the somewhat bikini-clad genie lady Shantae and several other fairly attractive games. It'll be interesting to see if they are going back to more of the medium quality 2D platforming graphics, or if they stick with the really high 3D, 2D, not 3D, but 2D platforming graphics that one of the more recent Shantae games has. But yeah. See if we can show some images of Shantae games. Just gonna see if we can get some screenshots of gameplay. So yeah, you can have some really more pixely 16-bit type image art in most of the games, but and a big part of that is a lot of these are like remakes. But then I think the game with sirens in it in the name had slightly better graphics. These were like Game Boy games, and so they do have that kind of that feel. Seven Sirens. Let's look at the visuals for Seven Sirens. Yeah, it doesn't really look that different in still images. But yeah, I do think the graphics are definitely better in Seven Sirens, and so that would be my thought, as far as that the art style stays fairly consistent, which I think it probably will, and that it continues to improve visually. Because yeah, even being based off of originally Game Boy Advance games, let's see, the last Shantae title last year's Risky Revolution wasn't technically a totally new game, since it was a revival of a 2004 Game Boy Advance game. No. So yeah, they kind of need to move forward into the world of an art style that makes sense for PC platformers now, because they aren't just going to be able to lean on, oh, this was originally designed for Game Boy Advance, therefore the resolution and the pixel depth and the colors were somewhat limited. And I do think WayForward will live up to that challenge, because let's face it, they don't really have anything else other than Shantae to sell at the moment. WayForward perhaps is the closest thing to a Western or more Western style shift up style company, in that they actually enjoy drawing their character attractively, but there is still a pretty big difference there in the 3D models of shift up for Stellar Blade versus the 2D pixely animation of Shantae, or even Nikke Goddess of Victory 2D pixelation, or even Destiny Child, the mobile game that's now shut down. Their art style in 2D was way better than Shantae is. And certainly Shift Up is willing to go a lot more lewd, I think, than Shantae ever would. Shantae feels very much like a game where you could have a 12-year-old play it and feel like they're getting away with something when they really aren't getting away with anything. There isn't going to be actual skin-tight clothing or actual nudity in Shantae, I don't believe. Moving on, Sky the Scraper is coming to PS5, Switch 2, and Switch. It's a roguelike action game currently on PC. DXVK 3.0.1 brings more bug fixes for Windows games on Linux and SteamOS. Let's see if any of these jump out as particularly interesting things. It does seem like very specific games always get targeted, and there's either something special about those very specific games, or that is just where the fandom of people who want to get this working are focused on. I wouldn't be surprised if there is just like 100 people that really love these games and want them to work, and the hope is fixing these games will fix other games. Yeah. There is going to be a question in my head, I think, in the future, as far as whether those kinds of games that are not very visually interesting even make sense making a YouTube short on them. But honestly, I probably should just make YouTube shorts on anything that doesn't have AI in it, and not try and curate it at all, because it will end up being just easier to do things that way than to say, well, this is ugly and this will be an underperforming YouTube short if I put it out there. Let's see, Video Games Chronicle says the Halo Campaign Evolves box version will come with a physical disc, so players can, quote, have tangible items to add to your collection. The news comes after 2 major blows to physical game collectors. What are the... Oh yeah, GTA 6 not coming with the disc is the other one. Of course, it would be really weird if Halo Campaign Evolved came with a disc, but only played on the Xbox Helix, and the disc actually couldn't be put into the Helix, or there's literally no data on the disc and it's just a piece of plastic. At a certain level, I mean, to maintain the status quo, you could easily have the soundtrack, just an audio CD, in the disc spot in a Blu-ray case for Xbox and PlayStation, and then the physical edition comes with the soundtrack and costs $10 more. That would be a very easy way to maintain the status quo and have people still build up physical collections of the plastic cases. Honestly, I don't know why people really want to maintain the plastic cases of video games that much. The spine art on video games is pretty boring looking. The front art is sometimes good, but often not good. And, you know, we are very much far away from the old days of box sets of TV shows actually looking good. Nowadays, you'll get very, very cheap, very, very ugly box sets that aren't even really box sets, just complete collections of things for TV. There's just less attractiveness there. And part of the reason why records are coming back into fashion, or at least people keep saying records are coming back into fashion, is definitely because the art on a record, when you stick it on the wall and actually never play the record, looks pretty and takes up a decent amount of space. Let's see. Echoes of Aincrad, Sword Art Online, Unanswered / Butterfly 18-minute preview was available, but now the video is privated. You can see this game. It's coming out July 9th. I wouldn't be surprised if not that many people actually play it, though. I mean, it is really late to get into a Sword Art Online game. There have been so many before, and none of them have really succeeded. D7VK 1.12 brings more CPU optimizations and fixes for retro Direct 3D games on Linux. There is a possibility that whenever I get around to building my computer, that actually playing older games becomes more of a focus and more of a hassle. And older is a very subjective term there. I wouldn't be surprised if everything from like 2000 on runs pretty well on Bakelite Linux, and everything before 2000 is more questionable. And as you get to those older games, you probably have very specific games that you want to run very specifically well. Definitely also think I'm going to probably be a little bit more picky on what games even get put on the fall list going forward, because as I am now so easily removing so many games from the fall list, I'm realizing that a lot of games that got put on the fall list, had I been mentally alert and energized, would have never made it to the fall list in the first place. And we'll see if that stays the same. Theoretically, anything with AI that has been opened should have automatically closed after 5 minutes. That code should be running at this point. I don't know if it did. We'll keep an eye out and see if we see any AI, and we'll keep an eye out as far as how long the stream goes. Pokemon is going to hold a charity Pokemon Champions tournament featuring Whistling Champion, Pizza Acrobatics Champion, and more. Which sounds kind of ridiculous, and definitely seems like a attempt to just push Pokemon Champions, despite the fact that people aren't that interested in it. This is one I probably took off the follow list because it's not coming out for a while, and I'm just going to put it back on the follow list. Yeah, Cry Me Light introduction trailer is available according to Gamatsu. If you want to scroll way down here, this is the third game with anime girls crying as a major theme. A simple good old games client for Linux, Mini Galaxy version 1.4.2 is out now. Which, okay. If money was no object, there is definitely an argument to backing up your collection onto good old games instead of having everything on Steam. Which backing up I mean by buying the games the second time on good old games. But yeah, I don't think that would happen. The thing that something like this might be interesting to for me would be if you could download your entire Steam library, back it up to a server somewhere, and then have a massive amount of storage to do that in the first place, but then have a launcher that would launch it from the server if Steam authentication servers stopped working, which would definitely require cracking the Steam authentication servers, which, yeah, it's questionable whether that would ever really happen. Yeah, I still haven't figured out though on like Emulation Station how to launch a modern Windows game using Proton and everything like that. There should be a way to do it, but I also wouldn't say Emulation Station is probably the best place to have a large collection of modern games. One of the thoughts I also had, as far as here's another project that I shouldn't start, is that it honestly wouldn't be too hard to create a digital slideshow of all the games you have in your library by just grabbing like this picture and then maybe grabbing screenshots, maybe doing a lot of polish to the about the game descriptions. There's a massive amount of stuff here that just you wouldn't want if you were going to make a slideshow of all the games you have, but yeah, I don't think anything in these sections actually matter so much. It would just be maybe taking the text of about the game and pictures, and maybe you even grab the video. That is a thought. And yeah, it really shouldn't be that much coding to make a script that would grab all of those. You would just look at a person's profile, get a list of all the games that are in their library, which potentially, if you make a game private, then it might open the profile in a private window so it doesn't see any of your private games, and then just process it for putting it on like an LCD screen, potentially an LCD screen in front of your Steam machine. And I don't know if it would be that much more difficult to identify which game was running at any one time. It might be a little bit more difficult, but not by much. Of course, that may be something that Valve themselves just implements, is that you may be able to pop up notifications. The other thing you could certainly do with an LCD screen is have like your friend chat pop up on the front of a Steam machine. So while I don't think an e-ink screen makes a lot of sense, I do think an LCD secondary screen might make a lot of sense. Now, what do I want to do with this game? I don't want to do anything with it, so I'm just going to close it. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says Epic settles with the Fortnite leaker who shared South Park, Minecraft, and Overwatch collabs. Hayden Cohen previously worked on Fortnite as an associate producer. The settlement doesn't mention any monetary relief. When questioned on it, the spokesman for Epic had nothing to share on that element. And it seems like, for the most part, they've agreed to an injunction that he won't share any more confidential information, which, yeah, inherently, I think the reason for this is there is a freedom of speech aspect here. I have made in the past arguments that it should just be employer beware, that if you piss off or fire a employee, they can freely release any information that's in their head, and that the idea of corporate secrets should be, for the most part, thrown out the window as a violation of people's free speech and as a violation of people's ability to threaten a company with damage in the same way that a company can threaten an employee with damage by firing them and making them starve to death. But yeah, I think we are far away from that point where, unless it's a military project or something, companies shouldn't be able to gag, mute, or have corporate secrets at all. And they should just treat their employees really nicely, even when they lay them off or fire them, so that they have the best chance of the employees not backstabbing them. There is arguably some legitimate public interest and concern as far as when these kinds of collabs are going to happen, or if these collabs are going to happen. I wouldn't say a lot, but a little. Moving on, Honkai Star Rail version 4.4 update in the Ravages Does the Whistle Sound launches July 15th. Definitely are some of these games that just constantly get updated. Roller Coaster Tycoon Engine Open RCT2 adds auto detection of RCT2 and RCT1 wine installs on Linux. I imagine that makes setup a lot easier. Yeah. I don't think we are quite at the point where we're going to start to see a lot of political games, but we probably are going to start to see more political games in a couple of months. Nintendo confirms Switch 2 will get a revision with a replaceable battery in Europe. The new EU rules come into place next year, forcing Nintendo to redesign the Switch. The question now is that rumored version with the better screen also the same one with a replaceable battery? Now, what really sucks about this European laws here is that there is likely not going to be a ton of cell phones in the United States with replaceable batteries, because the 5G used in Europe, I think, is a different frequency than the 5G used in the US, but maybe not. Maybe it's all the same frequency, or maybe that doesn't matter as much. But yeah. This is the only one that says user replaceable batteries is the Switch console. But there's no even confirmation here that the batteries inside the Joy-Cons themselves are going to be user replaceable. And it's saying that the battery capacity is actually going to be smaller for the Nintendo Switch 2 Pro. And this may just be a way to keep the price the same. And the GameCube controller for the Switch 2 is going to be 5% larger, which probably is just because it's harder to get 500 milliamp hour batteries these days. But yeah, according to that list, it looks like the laws may be skirted if the Joy-Cons just are considered an accessory plugged into the game console, and the game console itself has a replaceable battery, which I don't think really is the intent. So we may very well see the law updated quickly to address these kinds of bending of the rules. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 DLC character Future Saga Chapter 4 launches July 8th, which definitely seems like there's a lot of stuff happening in the future around Dragon Ball. I don't know if that's really in the anime or if that is only in the video games. Which, okay. Let's see, SteamOS 3.8.14 and SteamOS 3.8.22 beta bring an essential Wi-Fi fix and security improvements. They are moving very quickly with these new updates. A big part of that is the Steam machine, but also I think there might just be a lot more people working on SteamOS now. I wouldn't be surprised if with the Steam machine announcement there was also just a lot more people that were assigned at Valve, which to be assigned on any project of Valve is kind of a rarity, or at least it was in the past. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's more people assigned or allowed to work on SteamOS now. Fixed an issue where Wi-Fi would be limited to lower speeds on certain routers that advertise incorrect MCS requirements. I don't know what MCS stands for. And security and stability. Let's see what MCS requirements are. Yeah, they don't know either. Masters of Computer Science degree. Needs more relevant details. Can't wait for the day that computers could actually just read people's brains. Modulation and coding scheme requirements are very based on Wi-Fi standard being used, such as 802.11n, 802.11ac, AX. Okay, so that's a term I haven't really heard before, but it basically means all the settings that Wi-Fi's can have. Yeah. Alright, well, that definitely gives an argument to updating. It might even explain a bug that seemed to be happening where downloads were taking a long time on the Steam Deck I gave to a kid. Although that may very well just be a issue in general. Yeah. The kid's parent probably has their Wi-Fi set up in some weird way that works perfectly with iPhones and MacBooks, and then gets treated terribly with anything that's not an Apple product. Let's see. Nintendo will stop selling the Nintendo Switch 1 in 2027. Sales of the console on the Nintendo Store will conclude in February in Europe. I imagine that's the battery replacement laws more than anything else. And I imagine that original Switches will still be sold fairly deep into the years past 2027 in Japan, in particular, until they just run out of stock. I would assume that they already have stopped manufacturing Switch ones a long time ago. These kind of desktop pet games also I've always avoided, but I'm going to definitely continue to try and avoid. The Tristia Chronicles launches September 17th in the West, 2 game collection dated. There is definitely some weirdness in the cover art of one character versus the way it's depicted in another, and my mouse just locked up for some reason. I wonder if my battery is dying. I think I changed batteries relatively recently. Well, I don't know. Maybe something weird happened there. But yeah, I believe this game drastically changed its art style from one sequel to the other, which is something you don't see happen very often and isn't particularly welcome. I'm going to put that one on the follow list. Burn 9 is a political spy thriller that puts you behind a Metal Gear styled codec calls. Interesting. Xbox has confirmed plans to cut 5 studios and thousands of jobs. Double Fine, Ninja Theory, Compulsion, and more will leave or be sold with no closures. But no closures have been announced. This is Video Games Chronicles. Certainly the screenshot now has more of an ominous feel to it. You just have Master Chief looking around going, who are these companies, who are these employees am I going to lay off? Yeah, Undergrounded. Still something I want to keep on the follow list. As I continue to run out of steam going through the follow list cleanup, I am also still going to leave a lot of things. I wouldn't be surprised if in the first pass I only get it down to about 2,000 games, and then as we start to have just 15, maybe 25 games as part of the follow list cleanup on a stream-to-stream basis, I will go through more. And it may very well be 25 at most, and then some will get reduced even more. I'm still not 100% sure my code actually is working to auto-close tabs that just came out. Like, it should be working, but I'm not 100% sure it is. Undergrounded is coming to Switch this fall, according to Gamatsu. Dunderbeck. It's already on the follow list. Looks weird. A new demo for Dunderbeck and inventory management auto battler where you eat everything. That definitely seems weird. Quote, an outcome that preserves our history, end quote. This is from Video Games Chronicles. Studio thanks Xbox for allowing them to leave. Double Fine and Compulsion will retain their IPs. Compulsion will retain their IPs after leaving Xbox following huge cuts. Here you have the guy that runs Double Fine. I want to say Tim Sweeney, but I'm not 100% sure if that's who it is. If that's his name. He worked at LucasArts and is attributed to making Full Throttle, the point-and-click adventure game. Weirdly, though, I would say his output after LucasArts not really echoing any of the games from that time. We didn't get anything that felt too much like Full Throttle. I guess Brutal Legend kind of felt like that, and really did not get much that felt like Grim Fandango or Day of the Tentacle, which I think he worked on those games too. It is questionable how many other employees from LucasArts went over to Double Fine. Compulsion could try to do something more with We Happy Few. They probably should do something different with We Happy Few. Remastering it or making a sequel to Contrast is not terrible. And then trying something again with South of Midnight is probably a somewhat mistake. Even though, who knows? I like the idea of the character of South of Midnight, but I think the only way you could bring it back is if you made a spin-off game with a more normal art style that perhaps is more of a story-focused game, even visual novel type game. I feel like this is probably a screenshot of many years ago when Double Fine was acquired by Xbox Game Studios. Moving on, Bounty Sisters is coming to the West this fall. It first launched in 2025 in Japan. It is a shoot 'em up game with questionable quality animation of anime girls. You can grab some great games in the Summer Games Done Quick Humble Bundle. Bomb Rush, Cyberpunk, Dusk, Maiden and Spell, 20XX, Solar Ash, Ispa, the Web Spinoff, Grandma No, and The Gunk. I don't recognize most of those games. Dusk here. The first link. I am going to also, when I do a wishlist cleanup in particular, have to question how many boomer shooters I really would want to cover or ever own or play. Just because it does feel less likely to be my style. Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades is a VR game, and really at this point I am just removing everything from the VR thing. Maybe I will get ambitious and try and create my own separate file list for VR games, but right now anything that's VR only is just getting removed from the file list. If I get VR in a Steam frame or something better than a Steam frame in some distant future, the types of VR games you might want to get may be completely different anyways. Let's see. Every Japanese football team just got its own official Pokemon. This is Video Games Chronicle, so when they say football, they mean soccer to Americans, United Statesians. All 60 J-League teams will give away unique merchandise. I suspect they probably are not going to give you any starter Pokemon for any of the teams. No Pikachus, no. Well, there's a third evolution of a starter Pokemon there. Certainly that one is very popular. I think what they probably tried to do is match the existing logos of the teams to Pokemon. They probably had a lot of back and forth there. Well, I'd be surprised if there's a Pikachu, but yeah, there is other Pokemon that are rather popular amongst Pokemon I wouldn't even recognize. Was that all 70? There's, let's see, 10 in this group, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and maybe 70? It is perhaps slightly dangerous that fake imaginary animals are getting more prestige than real world animals. But yeah, I guess that is just the case, and I don't think there's really any other big complaint to make there other than this is probably just trying to get a different fandom to be slightly more interested in soccer. Moving on, Cthulhu Mythos Advanced Lunatic Whispers and the Island of Obohoth is coming to the West this holiday. It's a 2-game collection. I was about to wonder about that. Looks like visual novels. Here is a rare example of having the EA button pop up twice, which I didn't really program it to avoid for this scenario. So it's coming soon to early access, but it is also not even out yet. And I suppose what that means is I will just use the double EA option to doubly warn me that a game like this is early. Everything is player controlled in Strikers Club, the free-to-play football game releasing July 17th. It was the headline to that order. But yeah. Undoubtedly, we haven't seen any AI games at all, so I think those are being closed automatically. But undoubtedly, we are getting more of a curated selection, even if it is just by generic rules of what we're showing during these streams. And yeah, it doesn't feel as fair, but it feels right. It feels like this is the only way to really manage it to actually show off games that people actually care about. I don't think I am too off the mark to say that people probably don't want to support anything with AI in it, even if it is the case that a lot of the games that have AI in them are often claiming that it is just like one voice line or one piece of art. But people, I think game developers are going to just have to be punished until they learn that, honestly, if it is literally just one voice line and one piece of art, don't use AI. Avoid that scarlet letter on your game and just have an ugly piece of art, or have no art at all instead. But yeah, a lot of games are getting rejected for having AI without me even really looking at what the AI is, because the games don't look that good to even justify one small bit of AI being used. And inherently, when they say, oh, it's just one voice line, well, that means it would have been very easy for you to go on Fiverr.com and have somebody do a voice line, or get a friend, or get on a mic yourself and do that one voice line yourself. Moving on, Illusions of Idahari Trail is coming to the West in 2027. This sounds like a visual novel. It's an Otome visual novel. Gaming on Linux has the same article about the job cuts, so pretty much all of my news sources had it, but notice how Gaming on Linux here is really cutting to the text of the message, and this is a really long message to type up, which I probably should read all of it, but I definitely don't want to read all of that. But yeah, notice on serious matters like that, it probably should just be a wall of text, even though visually that's not what we're used to. Right. Give that a follow. This one is already mixed reviewed. Olympic Soiree Catharsis is coming to the West in 2027. Seems like we're getting several Otome visual novels being announced. But we're not seeing any Steam links for any of them pop up, which makes me wonder if they have AI in them, or if I somehow am having them closed because it doesn't support the English, which might have been something I programmed, but I don't recall programming it to do that way, which that is also a problem, is certainly as soon as I get this code programmed and going, I will forget what I did, and only my documentation will save me if I actually do documentation. Another Eden Begins physical edition has been announced for the West. This Steins Gate reboot is another questionable one. It's something I would want to own, but I question if I'll be able to make footage on it. Let's see, Steins Gate Octet of Shifting Space is coming to the West for the PS5, Switch 1 and 2, and PC. It is a 2011 released retro style visual novel. Right, let's actually open that tab back up and see that it linked to Steins Gate reboot. It is an early purchasing, it seems. Yeah, and the page doesn't really mention whether you'll get it on Steam if you pre-order, because pre-order is not even available yet. The idea of pre-order bonuses on Steam is not something that I run into a lot as I buy games very late. Here you have another example of what might be a very pretty thumbnail, but the actual art style in the game seems pretty different. I don't really see a reason why I'd keep this around, so I'll just wait and see if people say yes to it. I imagine the answer isn't going to be yes. Something about Danganronpa 2x2 being delayed to early 2027. Slam mode and enhanced world map have been detailed. Not super surprising that a Danganronpa game might get delayed, particularly to avoid GTA. Guilty Gear Strive guest DLC character is coming this winter. Guess we don't know who. Yep, and this looks like nothing. Solo Leveling Karma combat trailer is available on Gematsu. I'll give this a chance. Here we have a VR game that I may have not realized was a VR game. I think that is the main issue, is that a lot of games, because I didn't scroll down and look, weren't making it obvious that they were VR only, or that they were multiplayer only, or that they had AI in them. And those are all big red flags that in my mind I knew I don't want to play any of those games, but I didn't really have a way of filtering them out. Yeah, it's still very much a manual process in how I'm filtering them out. Let's see, Persona 4 Revival Rizi Kujikawa trailer. They're going to do a trailer for every single character, I'm sure. A lot of these horror games are also things that I may continue to make YouTube shorts on, but I'm not going to actually try and put them on the follow list, because I just don't think I'm going to play a random horror game that isn't at least partially an action horror game. Party action game Hatsune Miku Starry Party has been announced for Switch 2 and PC. Yeah, there's questionable styles of games around the horror games in particular that I want to play. This week's Japanese game releases: Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced, Echoes of Aincrad, Grand Blue Fantasy Relink, Innos Ragnarok, and more. So the big three games here are going to show a Japanese split between how many people are interested in the Western French game remake versus a old anime based game, Sword Art Online, versus a standard JRPG game, which, let's face it, this is also a JRPG game, and this is not too far from a JRPG game in itself. I wouldn't be surprised if it is very heavily Grand Blue Fantasy that sells. Of course, the split also might heavily due to with which ones actually play the best on a Switch 2 versus anything else. I heavily question whether these low polygon games have any reason to exist anymore. These are some muscly men. But yeah, I just don't know if there's a reason to go low polygon. It doesn't seem like it would be easier to make a game that looks like that, and it doesn't feel like there is a real demand for games that look like that. Alright, moving on. XE Grader Plus is now available. Yeah. Do I want to do anything with city cards? Yeah, I do kind of just question whether we've actually got the AI working, and maybe working too well. Because yeah, it definitely feels like we haven't seen any games with AI in them yet. Which, that was the plan, and it's still 2 hours and 14 minutes into the stream, having taken a break. We may very well have to take a break again. So it really is just going to depend on how long it takes to get to the end. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink Endless Ragnarok launch trailers available on Gematsu. Truth is, we're still getting a decent amount of games that look awful, even when they don't claim to have AI in it. Sentimental Graffiti Re has been confirmed for the PS5 and Switch. This is another visual novel. Yeah. What mostly concerns me today is why did the live stream video tab, why did the live stream tab crash? That's the one that makes the least amount of sense. Which I'll have to work with it. Particularly as I start to work on replacing my news macros. That's a really complicated macro, and it's still going to be fairly complicated, but I am going to probably have to rethink some things and rework it. So it's going to take more effort and more time. Solo Leveling Karma story trailer is available on Gematsu if you want to look at that. The Switch, Switch Lite, and Switch OLED model to be discontinued in Europe in mid-February of 2027. These are all being discontinued for a replaceable battery mode pack, which I wouldn't be surprised if... Yeah, these are all Switch 1 models being discontinued. Wouldn't be surprised if we see that there is just going to be one replaceable battery, Switch 2, and that is the only type of Switch that will be sold in Europe going forward, and that they aren't going to add different colors and different options, just because they don't want to have to make different SKUs. Here we have Komatsu with the same headline: Xbox to lay off 3,200 employees and divest in 5 studios. Arcane Studio and Undead Labs being a couple we haven't talked about as much. Alright, well, I think I'm going to have to take another short break, so I'll be back in just a minute or two. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I did just find out my Bluetooth water meter on my hose outside is not connected, which is perhaps not surprising. I think half my smart things might be disconnected. Not that half of them are disconnected, but they might be without me noticing. Which, yeah, could be a problem. Although I'm supposed to have all kinds of backups to prevent, like, if a hose burst type problems, if a spigot started leaking. Yeah, this doesn't look like anything. I think we're going to mostly go through games now, and we'll just see how many games we actually even see. What I just have realized right now is that I should probably process these in a slightly different way going forward for a couple of streams so that I know a real number as to how many games I actually put on the fault list in the shift. Although I could probably just estimate that it's been about 5 games so far. That I have put on the fault list or made a YouTube short on. Yeah. Which that doesn't seem like a lot. That is the sad truth I think is coming up. That's happening here. So Bitvoxel, I'm gonna hit F and see that I did make a short by adding that to the fault list just to make sure fault list is also making shorts. Or fan game Toho games. Yeah. I don't know if I made a complete thought there, but the point I was trying to make is we're just increasingly seeing garbage games after garbage games showing up on Steam, and even curating all of the AI stuff out. We still are running into a real problem there. And that is it. Yeah, I'm not premature on, I imagine, any games being shown. Let's see. If we open something like this, we have not seen anything with AI in it at all. So this is set to auto close after like 5 minutes. And I don't think we'll stick around for 5 minutes to check that, but I will check it myself. And so yeah, despite taking 2 breaks, really 1.5, we still are down to 2 hours. A big part of that may also have been that there wasn't a lot of news to talk about other than the Xbox layoffs. But I think a big part of that is also just going to come down to the fact that we got rid of a significant number of AI games. And AI does seem like it is just no longer going to be a concern. And just like that, the tab did just close. So then the only other thing that I would have thought is if I could find a game here that was written in like this language where English possibly is not supported. This one has AI in it also, but it actually does claim to support English. So I'd have to work a little bit harder to find one that really doesn't support English. And this was one of the first games that we looked at, which makes me assume that we have looked at the ones before this. I mean, really is no reason why we would be missing anything. And as I replace this code, if it does turn out that we really should have been opening stuff all the way back to July 2nd, which I don't see any reason why since today is July 6th, it still wouldn't make the problem that big of a deal because so many, there we saw it close itself automatically. There is possibly some articles we missed, but I don't think so. Not from GameDeveloper.com, which barely makes any articles. Actually, let's not close that, because that's all stuff I'm gonna have to work on. Which, at the end of the day, that's what I need to do now. This is nice because this definitely gives me more time to work on other things. One of my biggest jobs for today is just to make sure the trash gets taken out. Because, yeah, I've missed a couple days on that, and you really can't afford to miss a couple days on that. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.